Why is it playing in the background? That's weird. Did y'all hear that? Oh, my audio is all messed up. What? Hold on. Test 1, 2. Good. Can you hear me? Fuck, there's a delay. It's coming through my speaker. That's weird. Yeah, when I talk, what I say comes back through my speaker at me like 5 seconds later. And that's not normal. It never does that. I don't know what changed. Let me check my audios real quick. Wow. Okay. All right. We're just going to try to, you know what? I'm going to back out and I'm going to come back in. Hang tight. All right. Testes. Testes 1, 2. Fuck. It's still there. All right. Well, we're going to try to power through. Anyway. Why are you doing this? Anyway. So how you guys doing? I'm going to turn my my speaker down so I just don't hear myself come back. But yeah, I've missed you guys. How y'all been? My summer has been insane. And check my other tabs. Yeah, I don't have any other tabs open. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I don't. This is literally. Oh shit. That's weird. My my feed was open on my Twitter tab. I don't know why. But yeah, that did it. That's all right. Perfect. All right. Yeah, let's start over. Hi. How you guys doing? Yeah, I've missed you guys. I really have. The summer's been crazy. It's not over yet, but we're in the home stretch. Oh, that's like both good news and bad news, Dr. Kip. Can't imagine how hard it is to evict somebody, but definitely understand sometimes it just needs to be done. Anyway, good news is this weekend Rachel and I are going to see Fall Out Boy. That's why I dyed my hair purple. She dyed it purple too, so we can match and be a cute couple. Anyway, thanks guys for joining me. A little while back, Alex O'Connor interviewed Dr. William Lane Craig, and they talked a lot about some of the things that Bart Ehrman. And they talked a lot about some of the things that Dr. Craig says, and William Lane Craig went on Capturing Christianity and responded, and I watched it. And there was some bullshit that I had to I wanted to address. Now before I get started, I want to preface this because I've run into this in the past. I'm not going to be nice here. However, if I ever happen to meet Cameron or Dr. Craig one day, I'd be happy to buy y'all a beer, and I will shoot the shit somewhere, and we'll be best friends. But here, I'm going to have fun at your expense, because for real, this is some bullshit. So without further ado, let's get started. Oh, new layout. Oh, and by the way, if anybody's watching this, any apologist types are going to be watching this, feel free to respond. And don't be nice to me back. You know, what I dish out, I expect in return. So, here we go. Present. No, not that one. There it is. Oh, that's different. Hold on. StreamYard updated since I... Yeah. That's not too bad. All right. So here we go. This is going to be fun. Prepare to take notes.
I mean, his view on the matter, along with many others, is that we have a few facts about Jesus that we can pretty confidently say are true. Firstly, that, you know, a man called Jesus existed
at all?
And was sort of going around teaching an ethical code of sorts and gaining followers, got into disrepute with the Roman authorities, was killed by crucifixion, and that afterwards groups of people claim to have seen him. Do you think that all of these facts are sort of well established?
Yes.
So given that, how do we explain the fact that all of these are true at the same time?
Oh, well, I don't see any trouble at all. I mean, we have other figures in history for whom we have things like that with those four facts. I mean, Romulus, the founder of Rome, I don't know if he was a historical figure or not, but people thought he was, and he certainly ended up somehow leaving the earth, and people, there were eyewitnesses saying that they saw him alive afterwards.
All right. So in response to that, here's clip number 1 from Cameron's interview with Dr. Craig. By the way, a massive storm just rolled in, and it's hitting the street in front of me like the fist of an angry god. So if you hear some background noise, that's what it is. And if I suddenly get disconnected, you know why.
Now, Ehrman's response to this is really puzzling. He agrees that the facts mentioned by Alex are historical facts.
First, he doesn't agree that they're historical facts. He agrees that there's historical claims to these events. It's not the same thing. It's not Dr. Ehrman saying, yeah, these are historical facts. These happened. That's not what he's saying at all, but go off.
Admits that, but he says these are easily explained. Why? Because similar facts are attested by other figures in antiquity, like Romulus and Apollonius. Now, on the face of this is bizarre. All
right. So apologists like to insist that stories surrounding Jesus were unique from the other local god myths at the time. Jesus was totally different from all those others. That's what you hear, like Mike Jones of Inspiring Philosophy, like all the like YouTube apologists. That's what you hear them say in response to like Dennis R. McDonald's books and things like that. Like, no. This is Jesus was totally different. But in the earliest apologetic letter written by Justin Martyr around 156 CE to the Emperor Antonius to defend the legitimacy of Christianity, he says the exact opposite. Thunder boom. Did y'all hear that? That was loud as shit. Yeah, right, Dark Hip? So here's what he had to say. And when you say also that the Word, which is the firstborn of God, was produced without sexual union, and that he, Jesus Christ, our teacher, was crucified and died, and rose again and ascended into heaven, we propound nothing different from what you believe. regarding those who have been esteemed sons of Jupiter, for you know how many of the sons that were your esteemed writers ascribed to Jupiter, Mercury, the interpreting word of the teacher of Asclepius, not sure how to pronounce that, who, though he was a great physician, was struck by a thunderbolt and ascended to heaven, and Bacchus too, after he had been torn limb from limb, and Hercules, when he had committed himself to the flames to escape his toil, and the sons of Leba and Dioscorus, and Perseus, son of Danae, and Bellerophon, sorry, who through sprung from mortals, rose to heaven on the horse Pegasus. For what all shall I say of Ariadne, and those who, like her, have been declared to be set among the stars? And what of the emperors who died among yourselves? Emperors like Romulus, who Bart Ehrman mentioned, who died among yourselves, whom you deemed worthy of deification, and in whose behalf you produce someone who swears he has seen the burning Caesar rise to the heavens from the funeral pyre. So Justin Martyr is saying, we're not different, we're totally the same. Because Justin Martyr is trying to destigmatize this new religion that everybody, because at the time, all the like emperors and governors and everybody at the time who were learning about the new Christian sect were accusing them of being superstitious and weird. So Justin Martyr writes this apology. He's like, we're not weird. We are just like you. The things we believe are no different. So every time I hear someone say like, yeah, Jesus wasn't at all like the other gods. Really? Next
reasons for doubting the burial account that you don't take seriously. What is your response to this?
What must not be missed here is the concession that Bart Ehrman makes to Alex O'Connor. Ehrman concedes that if the burial narrative is historically reliable, then it becomes extremely difficult to deny the historicity of the empty tomb. Because if the burial story is accurate, that implies that the site of Jesus' grave was known to Jew and Christian alike in Jerusalem. And therefore, when the disciples began to preach the resurrection of Jesus, that tomb had to be empty in order for belief in the resurrection of a dead man to originate and flourish in the very city where he was publicly crucified and his tomb was known. So that means that Ehrman is in the very difficult position of having to disprove the burial account.
Reasons.
Did you catch that? When the disciples began to preach the resurrection of Jesus, the tomb had to have been empty. Says who? Paul, who wrote multiple letters to multiple churches addressing both Jew and Gentile converts. In those letters, he speaks frequently about the resurrection, but never once mentions an empty tomb. In all of his letters, not once does he mention an empty tomb. So that means that it would seem that to Paul and to his audience, the empty tomb narrative had not been developed yet. They were not familiar with this narrative. Or at the very least, if it did happen, it wasn't relevant. They didn't really care about it. But it's likely that this idea wasn't developed yet. So yeah, this claim that the tomb had to be empty in order for Christians to be, or in order for Jews to be converted and Gentiles to be converted, that doesn't seem to be what the evidence says. What the evidence says is the empty tomb narrative was not necessary. They didn't need it. Next clip.
Tomb account. But the burial account is the sine qua non of the empty tomb story. If you're going to deny the empty tomb, then you've got to disprove the burial account. Well, we've got good reasons to believe that the burial account is reliable. We have at least 5 independent sources in support of the burial account. Moreover, the burial of Jesus by a member of the Sanhedrin, rather than by his beloved disciples or by his family is unexpected and therefore very unlikely to have been a fictional or legendary creation in the early Christian community.
So yeah, that's a great question. And that's exactly where I think this narrative came from. There's a very similar story in Genesis 57, I think I want to say, where Joseph dies and his sons ask, and he has a tomb carved out for himself, and his sons ask the king for his body to be buried in the tomb that he carved out for himself. His name's even Joseph. Like it's nuts. But yeah, there's a lot of narratives in the New Testament that very closely mimic narratives in the Old Testament. There's a lot of them. All right, where are we at next?
Tomb account, but the burial account.
That was it. Okay. So yeah, it's true that we have multiple accounts of Jesus being buried, but that's not unusual. Being thrown into a common grave or a mass grave is also called a burial. It doesn't inherently mean it was a decent burial. And so he says we have 5 accounts of the burial, right? And then he peppers in Joseph of Arimathea was a member of the Sanhedrin, but Joseph of Arimathea is only mentioned as being a member of the Sanhedrin in 2 of the Gospels. Mark and Luke. And Matthew, he's just a rich man. And in John, it doesn't say anything about him at all. But that's why the character of Joseph of Arimathea was put in there and given this prestigious title, because that's what we would have needed in order to claim the body of Jesus from the Roman government. You would have had to have been somebody of great importance in order to do that. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a sec. Maybe it's 47, Kip. Or maybe I'm just making stuff up. Anyway.
Now, Ehrman asserts that there are lots of reasons to doubt that Jesus was buried, but you notice he never says what they are. Instead, he immediately changes the subject. So if
really?
Now, Ehrman.
Except he does in a clip that Cameron actually plays later in the interview. Ehrman doesn't explain why.
What do Romans do with crucified victims? So we have records of, we don't have lots of records. I mean, one of the really interesting things that people don't realize, we have no literary description of a crucifixion from the ancient world. Like, nobody describes how they did it. Like, were they typically nailed? We know they were nailed sometimes because we have some nails that with DNA on, and we've got that organic material on them. Were they tied? Were they cross beams? Were they stakes? I mean, there's all sorts of stuff we don't really know. We do have a number of references to what Romans did once the person died on their crosses, and the accounts are consistent that what they did is they left them on their crosses as part of the humiliation.
Yes.
That they would decompose on the cross and be attacked by scavengers. And so we have off-the-cuff remarks in a number of sources that that's just what they.
Yeah. And I have a bunch of those references we'll talk about a little bit later. So, yeah, this is awkward. So Craig to be like, Dr. Ehrman doesn't explain why he thinks this, and then later Cameron like plays this clip. I thought that was hilarious. And Dr. Craig knows, right? He's not dumb. He's not a dumb person. He knows. He knows Ehrman's position on this. He knows why he thinks that. But he's just like, hey, he doesn't give any reason. He just changes the subject. It's insanely dismissive. Next clip.
Tomb, namely, wholly apart from the burial account and its credibility, there are at least 6 independent sources for the empty tomb, some of which are among the earliest source materials in the New Testament, such as the pre-Markan Passion story. Secondly, the Markan account of the discovery of the empty tomb lacks signs of legendary embellishment or theological reflection that you would expect to find in a later legendary account. Thirdly, the tomb was probably discovered empty by women. Any conceivable motivation for having women be the discoverers of the empty tomb would have been better met by having male disciples discover the tomb, given the low status of women in a patriarchal culture and their inability to serve as credible witnesses.
Yeah, this is an argument that Craig has used for years, and it's so bad. It's demonstrably false. First, what's our earliest account? 1 Corinthians 15. He appeared to Cephas, then the 12, then 500 brethren. Then he appeared to James, then the apostles, and then he appeared to me also. What's missing? The women. The earliest account, the earliest tradition, does not have the women in it at all. And he says last of all, he means he didn't appear to anybody else. So why is Paul omitting the women here? Unless the women were added later. And there's a reason for that. Women were added later because the tomb was added later. Right? And even when you talk about the women, which women? It's different in every account. Right? So Mary Magdalene is in all four of them, but it's different other than that. But it was the job of the women to take care of tombs. That's why the women were put there. Men were not supposed to take care of the tombs because men were in charge of performing the ceremonies of the temple, and they weren't allowed to go near a dead body. That's why women took care of the tombs. That's why women were the ones to discover it. So this isn't weird at all. This is not an art. He's employing the argument from embarrassment here, and it doesn't work at all because this is consistent with what would have happened in that scenario. And also, my favorite comeback to this argument is in a letter from Pliny the Younger to the emperor. He said, "I judged it so much the more necessary to extract the real truth with the assistance of torture from 2 female slaves who were styled deaconesses. But I could not discover nothing more than depraved and excessive superstition." Not just women, slave women who were deaconesses in the church. And Pliny tortured them to get information about the church out of them. If the testimony of women was not reliable, why was he torturing them to get information? So yeah, that whole the women discovering the empty tomb thing is demonstrably bananas.
But the fact is that when he claims to be a historian, this is mere posturing. He has no training or degree in history. He's a textual scholar, and in his popular level books, he likes to posture as a historian.
Now, this is such a weird hill to die on, to say that Bart Ehrman isn't a historian, because the term historian is a very vague, very broad title that's an umbrella over several different fields. Textual critic is one of the disciplines under that field, but Bart Ehrman does a shit ton more than just textual criticism. But keep that energy, because I'm about to bring up an old clip that is about a little more than a year old that some of you may have seen before.
Million chance that the Christian God is true. Wow.
And so my attitude toward this is just the opposite of Kyle's. Far from raising the bar or the epistemic standard that Christianity must meet to be believed, I lower it. I think that this is a message which is so wonderful. So,
did you hear what you just said? When you come to Christianity, you shouldn't be looking to raise the bar. The God who invented truth, the God who is synonymous with what's real and what's true, don't raise your epistemic bar for God to meet. You put it on the floor. You lower it. William Lane Craig just said he literally lowers the bar as low as he can. And if that's the bar that his omnipotent, omniscient, all-powerful God can clear good enough for William Lane Craig, Think about that the next time he's spouting off the Kalam cosmology argument to you. This is the man who says he sets the bar for God on the floor, and he's proud of it. This is
So who is William Lane Craig to say that Bart Ehrman's not a historian when he admits that he lowers his epistemic standards in order to make the evidence fit? He has to lower his standards. That's not what a historian does. If you lower your standards across the board a lot, then you're going to believe a lot more shit happened in history that didn't actually happen. So, and also, why are you raising the standard of a historian for Bart Ehrman and lowering the standard for God? I don't know. It's weird. It's a weird hill to die on.
Mention as well that we actually have archaeological evidence that victims of crucifixion in Judea were properly interred in a tomb. There was an archaeological discovery of a man named Yehohanan, which still had the crucifixion nail in the ankles with a piece of wood from the cross affixed to it, because apparently the nail had hit a knot in the wood and bent so that it could not be extracted. And the fact that this was preserved shows that the body was put into a tomb where the flesh would decay, and then it was placed into an ossuary or bone box.
So he says it was placed in a tomb to decay, and then it was placed in an ossuary. This is what he's talking about. There's no evidence that it was placed in a tomb to decay and then placed in an ossuary. This is the bone box he was found in. This is Yohanan. This is the heel he was talking about. And inscribed on the side, it says Yohanan, the son of Hegel. I don't know where he's getting this idea that it was placed in a tomb to decay and then placed in this box. There's no evidence of that. We don't know that that's what happened. Also, there was like one or two other people in the box with him. So it's not at all the same thing. And for other reasons, this is one example out of tens of thousands of crucifixion accounts that we have. One exception is not very good evidence, right? Being thrown into a mass grave was the norm. Yeah. And the tomb gave signs that Yehohanan and his family were aristocratic or members of a hereditary or ruling class. There are some exceptions in a couple of sources where, like, if you're a Roman soldier and you're crucified, you may be allowed to be taken down and given a decent burial. But you would have had to have been someone special. Get more into that in a minute. According to Josephus, on rare and very specific occasions, lower-level criminals were allowed a burial. We don't know what crime Yehohanan was crucified for, but considering against the state was not a low-level crime. Conspiring against, I read that wrong. Conspiring against the state was not a low-level crime, so it's not likely that Jesus would have been qualified for such an exception. You could be a low-level crime would be like stealing a horse, right? Something small like that. Murder, even, would be considered, maybe could be considered a small-level crime. But conspiring against the state, which is what Jesus was crucified for, was a high-level crime. So, again, this makes it much less likely that Jesus would have been granted this exception. And we don't know how long Yehohanan was left on the cross before being placed in the ossuary. He may have been up there, or he may have been taken down shortly after his death. He may have been left up there for days. He may have been left up there for weeks. We don't know. We don't have enough evidence one way or the other. His body could have absolutely been left up there, picked apart by scavengers. His bones fall into the bottom of the cross and then picked up later, weeks later, and thrown in the ossuary. That's an entirely plausible option in the scenario. We don't have enough information about this to say either way. So this is not great evidence that Jesus was buried in a tomb. I would argue that it's actually evidence against that Jesus was buried in a tomb.
Josephus writing in the 70s, states that in his time, even the bodies of, quote, those sentenced to crucifixion are taken down and buried before sunset, end quote. That's from Jewish War, chapter 4, section 37.
But he doesn't tell you the whole chapter. The whole thing is, and now the outer temple and all of it was overflowed with blood. And the day as it came on, they saw 8,500 bodies there. They were raged on the Edomians. The rage of them was not satisfied by those slaughters. But now they betook themselves to the city and plundered every house and slew everyone they met. And for the others, multitude and esteemed it needless to go on with killing them. But they sought for the high priest, and they generally went with the greatest zeal against them. And as soon as they caught them, they slew them. And they, standing up on the dead bodies in the way of the jest, upbraided Annas with his kindness to the people, and Jesus, not the same Jesus, different Jesus, with his speech made to them from the wall. Nay, they proceeded to that degree of impiety, as to cast away their dead bodies without burial. Although, so slaughtering shit tons of people, right? That's what's happening before the verse that Craig is mentioning. And then in the sentence right before, and they cast away their dead bodies without burial. Craig leaves this part out, and he starts the quote here. The Jews used to take so much care of the burial men that they would take down those that were condemned and crucified and bury them before the going down of the sun. Now, Josephus is speaking in the past tense at a time where the Jews were ruling over Judea. Rome was in charge of Judea now. They didn't give a shit about that. They weren't doing that anymore. Josephus is reminiscing on something that used to happen. He's saying now bodies are cast away without burial, but they used to be buried. So, again, with the cherry picking from the world's most famous apologist.
So we have literary evidence as well as archaeological evidence that in Judea during peacetime, the Romans respected the Jewish custom of immediate burial of crucified victims on the day of crucifixion.
Did they? So this is one verse or one passage that apologists like to cite in regard to this particular apologetic. Rulers who conducted the government as they should and do not pretend to honor but do really honor their benefactors, make a practice of not punishing any condemned person until those notable celebrations in honor of the birthdays of the illustrious Augustus house are over. I have known cases where on the eve of a holiday of this kind, people who had been crucified had been taken down and their bodies delivered to their kinsfolk because it was, though thought well to give them burial and allow them an ordinary rites. For it was meet them the dead that should also I'm getting tongue-tied. For it was meet that the dead also should have the advantage of some kind of treatment upon the birthday of the emperor, and also that the sanctity of the festival should be maintained. So this is not the Sabbath like in the Old Testament. This is the holiday of the emperor that this happened. And again, he's talking to rulers who used to allow this to happen, and now they're not doing it anymore. So he's like, we need to go back to doing this because y'all aren't doing what they used to do, right? This ceremony used to be sacred, and y'all aren't doing that anymore. That's the context of this passage. Next clip.
Jesus was not the exception to the rule. Taking the bodies down and burying them on the day of crucifixion was the rule that was followed in.
That was the rule, you guys, in Rome. They except Judea was under the control of Rome at the time, under Pontius Pilate, and he didn't give a shit about Jewish burial customs. He did not care. A Jew could not go to the Roman emperor and ask for the body of a crucified victim. We don't have any evidence of that ever happening, not in one source that I can find. In fact, Pilate says, or it says of Pilate, he was a man of inflexible, stubborn, and cruel disposition. Philo mentions his venality, his violence, his theft, his assaults, his abusive behavior, his frequent executions of untried prisoners, and his endless savage ferocity. So, as he was a spiteful and angry person. Pilate was, like, if I remember right, he was the only emperor that was like fired and exiled, right, for his cruelty. So this idea that he was sympathetic to the Jewish customs is nuts. There's no evidence of that other than the Gospels. Yeah, there are no known exceptions in Jerusalem and the land of Israel. The one exception that I talked about earlier in Philo doesn't apply outside of Alexandria. Or only, does not apply outside of Alexandria. So it doesn't apply in Judea, which is 400 miles away, right? This standard is not like all encompassing of the entire Middle East. It's very focused, right? So to say that like there's this account of this exception to this rule 400 miles away, thus it probably applies over here too. That's not how that works. You don't do, yeah.
And with regard in particular to the burial of Jesus, Ehrman doesn't have any reason to think that this is not historical. All he can point to is general Roman practice outside of Judea, but doesn't draw the relevant comparisons in first century Israel.
Was it a norm of a Roman governor to oversee each trial and crucifixion, or did Pilate make an exception for Jesus? From my recollection, I think it was the norm. But like in that passage I mentioned earlier, he would execute people without a trial. Like it would have been very quick. Like in the Gospels, when they make Jesus' trial a whole spectacle in the public, and it takes some time, and there's like banter back and forth. And Pilate like offers Barabbas instead. And it's like, are you sure you want me to crucify? Like it's this whole thing. In reality, it would have been like Jesus would have been taken to Pilate, and Pilate would have been like, yeah, execute him. Good. Bye. It would have been like minutes. Yeah, hope that helped. I don't know how many accounts of I guess it also depends on whether it was a time of war or not. During peace, they would have been much more frequently. They would have had to go to the governor for sentencing. But during war, that wasn't necessary, as we'll see here in just a second. Here's some of the sources of what happened to the bodies of crucified victims that we have. Horace, a Roman author, records the moment a slave owner decides not to crucify his slave. And he says, "You shall not therefore feed the carrion crows on the cross." In other words, I'm not going to crucify you and let the birds eat your body. That's what he's saying. Juvenal, a Roman satirist, he said, "The vultures hurries from the dead cattle and dogs and corpses to bring some of the carrion to her offspring." That's saying like, these birds will take meat from the crosses and bring it to feed their young, because that's what they did. Artemidorus, terrible names, was an interpreter of dreams, very famous interpreter of dreams, and said, "A crucified man is raised high, and his substance is sufficient to keep many birds." In other words, I can't remember the context of this passage, but this would have been a large man, and his substance would have fed a lot of birds. Hey, Pat. You just missed the best part. I'm kidding. There's a inscription on a murderer's tomb. He said, "Hung alive for the wild beasts and birds of prey." All right. So here's an account. This was interesting. There's an account of a guy who was crucified and he was buried. But on his tombstone, it says his body fed the birds before he came here. Greek historian of the first century BCE, Diodorus. It was the general law. It was the general law that the temple robbers should be cast forth without burial. Greek author Diocris, not even going to try, indicates that in Athens, anyone who suffers at the hands of the state for a crime was denied burial, so that in the future there may be no trace of a wicked man. So these are some of the historical accounts that we have of what happens to a body after he's crucified. We don't have a lot. This is what we have. A couple more. Josephus. Now, it happened in the fight with a certain Jew was taken alive, whom, by Titus' order, was crucified before the wall to see whether the rest of them would be affright and abased of their obstinacy. So there was a Jew that was crucified, and he was put up on the wall to show everybody, this is what's going to happen to you. They left. They didn't take him down and bury him. They left him up there to scare people away. Diogenes crucifies 800. Varsus crucifies 2,000. Quadratus crucifies all who remained alive in Cumanus. A multitude are crucified. Book 4, chapter 5. They proceeded to that degree of impiety as to cast away their dead bodies without burial, although the Jews used to take so much care of the burial of men that they took down those who were condemned and crucified and buried them before the going down of the sun. The passage we're talking about earlier. Again, this is something they used to do. Not anymore. I saw many, Josephus, I saw many captives crucified, and I remembered 3 of them as my former acquaintances. I was very sorry at this in my mind and went in tears in my eyes to Titus Caesar and told him to them. So he immediately commanded them to be taken down. Josephus was a Jew. He went to the emperor and said, now these guys were still alive, for context. It's like, these are friends of mine with tears in his eyes. He's a Jew. He pleaded with the emperor to have them taken down. And the emperor was like, yeah, all right, go ahead. And I think like 2 of them still died afterwards. But he still had to get permission from the emperor to do this. So every account that we have, lots of accounts of people being crucified. No accounts of them being given a decent burial around Judea. And of course, we have Jesus, 1 Corinthians 15, just says he was buried. That's it. That could mean anything. That could mean he was buried in a tomb, or it could mean he was buried in a common grave or mass grave. Next clip.
Believed that death was a one-way street, and therefore people did not come back from the dead. Now, certainly, pagans believed that you might see a ghost, or you might see a vision of a dead person. But as Wright points out, for the ancient pagan, seeing a vision of a dead person was not evidence that he was alive. It was evidence that he was dead.
Interesting. Because what are our earliest accounts of Jesus' resurrection describe it as? From Paul.
Believe that
each account says he received visions. Paul never says that Jesus rose bodily, met him in person, shook his hand. He had visions, revelations. So if William Lane Craig, Craig, I used to be a big fan of his. I read like 3 of his books when I was in college. So yeah, it's weird them doing this now. Where was I? So every account is so if N.T. Wright or Craig is quoting N.T. Wright as saying that if someone receives a vision of somebody, then that's evidence that he's dead, not alive. Paul, hello. Are you reading this? That's how Paul describes his encounters with Jesus, as visions and revelations. Bananas. Next slide.
We have
We're almost done.
Good evidence that these were not merely visionary experiences, that is, say, subjective, intramental experiences, but that they were extramental experiences of an objective reality in the real world. And I say that not only on the basis of the gospel evidence, but also on the basis of Paul's evidence concerning his teaching about the nature of the resurrection body. The strategy of those who are skeptical of physical appearances is to try to drive a wedge between Paul and the Gospels with respect to the physicality of the appearances. And I think that wedge strategy can be decisively refuted. Paul believed in a physical resurrection body and therefore physical resurrection appearances just as much as those portrayed in the Gospels.
Yeah, really interesting. Because what he says, but someone who will say, how are you raised from the, how is the dead raised? And with what kind of body are they come? You fool. That which you sow does not come to life unless it dies. So also is the resurrection of the dead. So it is sown a perishable body and raised an imperishable body. It is sown in dishonor, is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness and raised in power. It is sown a natural body and it is raised a spiritual body. That's Paul in 1 Corinthians 15. Now I say this, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom. So if Jesus resurrected bodily with flesh and blood, how is he supposed to inherit the kingdom of heaven? Now, to be fair, there's a lot of nuance here. It seems like Paul thinks that the body that Jesus assumes and the same body that each of us would assume after the resurrection would be something you could touch, like hold, not like a ghost where your hand passes through, like you can touch them, but it's not flesh and blood. It's something still solid, but it's not a fleshly resurrection at all, like Dr. Craig is saying. That there is nothing in any of Paul's letters that suggests Paul thinks Jesus raised bodily and walked around like with flesh and blood. There's nothing. So I have no idea what the fuck he's talking about here. Anyway, next.
So one thing that I wanted to point out, and I've made a whole video about this, is when he says that claim is not evidence. I think that's honestly just silly. Like it's not something that we should take seriously. If my daughter came home one day and was like, "Daddy, someone hit me at school today," I would take that seriously. I would be calling the school. I'd try to figure out what happened. Like I would take that as very good evidence that something happened and that she was hit. I would take her claim as very good evidence. And so I think it's just honestly bonkers that someone could say that, a claim is not evidence. But then it seems like he wants to say that a claim, like one person's claim is not evidence, but if you have a whole bunch of claims from different people, then that's evidence. Which, if that's his standard, then I think in the case of Dr. Craig's case, each of the facts that he mentions do have, like multiple attestation is in place for these facts.
Oh, yeah.
For the empty, for the burial, for the empty tomb, for the appearances, we've got multiple attestation. So I think Bart Ehrman would have to admit that we've got evidence for each of these facts.
So this is incredibly stupid. My kids fight all the time, every day. And they're always like, he hit me first. No, he hit me first. No, he hit me first. One of them's lying. Kids lie all the time. Right? So this is not the same thing. Now, when we're talking about multiple attestation of something that happened in history, this is an example I like to come up. I like to bring up. This is from Herodotus, and he says, others, however, of the Indians are on the borders of the city of the. I'm gonna skip a little bit of this. Anyway, he's claiming he has testimony from the Indians. And what they say is in their homeland, there are ants that are larger than foxes that they keep at the residence of the king of Persia. The Indians are telling him this. Yeah, back home, we have giant ants that our king keeps as pets. Okay. You can't equate your daughter coming home from school saying she get hit with something like this, right? He prefaces this very similar to the way Luke does. I got multiple people telling me this. So we have a couple of accounts from the Battle of Valley Forge that say that George Washington dodged bullets, fucking Matrix style. They saw that. They saw him do that. We going to believe that? There are just thousands of examples like this throughout historical literature. And that's what textual criticism does. It looks at these accounts and is like, is this true? Is this not true? Is this true? Is this not true? This probably isn't true. Giant ants, probably not true, right? George Washington doing the Neo to dodge bullets, probably not true. Jesus raising from the dead, probably didn't happen. Not the same thing as people saying, yeah, Jesus rose from the dead. Or, sorry, not the same thing as saying, my daughter said that someone hit her from at school. And Cameron knows this. It's not the same, not on the same level of evidentiary definition, I guess I'll say. Yeah. And okay, yeah, can't help but bring this up. We don't have anybody telling us anything. This is what we have. This is our evidence right here. Divinely inspired, but not divinely preserved, apparently. Right? So your daughter coming home from school and saying she got hit, it's not the same thing as whatever is on these. Anyway. Yeah. So that's the thing. Cameron knows a lot more about philosophy and epistemology than I do. So it's weird to hear him say shit like this. But that's most apologists, right? Anyway, where are we at? I'm lost.
But so as we wrap up the show today, that's all the clips that we've got. Is there anything that you'd like to say about the clip overall as we sort of wrap everything up?
Just that I think that Ehrman does a great job of calmly and confidently presenting his aberrant views so that unsuspecting laymen could well be deceived by what he's saying. And I hope that folks have been able to see that credible scholars like N.T. Wright and others that I've referred to have a quite different view of the matter than does Bart Ehrman. He is an outsider. He's in the tiny minority in denying things like the burial and empty tomb of Jesus and the appearances to groups. And I hope folks will not be deceived by what he's saying.
Yeah. So that's the last clip I got. But yeah, Bart Ehrman's not a real historian. You should listen to Craig or N.T. Wright because Bart Ehrman's views are in the minority. And the thing is, they're not. Now, Ehrman's position that Jesus was not buried is pretty fringe. It's not widely accepted because he's a New Testament scholar. Most New Testament scholars are Christians. They're not going to even entertain that idea that Jesus wasn't buried. So, of course, he's going to be in the minority in that position. Hell, even Dr. James Tabor, who's an atheist, believes that the tomb was empty or that Jesus was given decent burial. I disagree with him on that point, just based on what I've seen. But he's an atheist and still holds that views. I think he thinks somebody stole the body. That's not a weird thing to believe. Tombs were robbed all the time. There were laws in ancient Rome about what would happen to you if you robbed a tomb. Grave robbers, I think, were executed or had their hand chopped off or something. I can't remember now. I don't have the references. But that was the thing. Stealing bodies was a thing. So the idea that Jesus' body was stolen isn't a weird claim at all. So Dr. Craig, who wants to lower the standard. I don't even know. Don't even know where to go with that. So yeah. Just saw that, and I wanted to make those responses because I miss going live. I thought I'd use this as an excuse too, because I miss you guys. But yeah, let me know what y'all think. I'm gonna get going because I am quite tired. It's been a long day, but thanks for joining me. I want to do more like things like this, but maybe a little bit more smooth, maybe pre-recorded. I don't know. But yeah, thanks for joining me. Appreciate y'all. Love y'all. And here's a quick reminder. Hold on. Let me find my outro. There it is. Here's a quick reminder that I don't know how to end shows. Y'all have a great night.
Hold on to your butts.